Sometimes that happens in
but they got like 4 supplemental.
Hey, Stephen.
Hey, good morning.
Morning. Just letting everyone in. I did hit record, so I didn't forget that part. So we'll have this to share. Well, thanks to everyone who's here right on time. We will give it maybe one more minute. I have to admit people into the waiting or out of the waiting room onto the meeting. And once I start presenting, I don't want to miss anyone. So in about 1 minute, we'll get started. Again, very thankful for everyone who's attending at this point. My name is Dustin Riekman with Lockmuller, familiar face with most of the names on the list here, but we'll get started in just a minute. Well, welcome again to everyone. Had a few more people join in. I'll try to keep an eye on the waiting room, make sure I don't miss anyone. Here's some more people popping in. My name is Dustin Riekman. I'll be doing the majority of the presentation today. I'll have some input from the fellows at Greater Egypt as well. So yeah, really appreciate you guys being here. I will keep my camera on here just for a brief time, then I'll turn it off. The other thing I'm doing is, as you guys are coming on, I'm muting you just to make it easy for everyone to hear. If you do have something to say, you can, you're probably all way familiar with Zoom meetings at this point, but you can raise your hand and either myself or Stephen or Peter on our team will notice that and unmute you, so you can comment, or obviously you can unmute yourself and interject at any time as well. But if some people are on the phone and things like that, it's not always that easy to actually unmute yourself. So yeah, it's 2 minutes after, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I did a sound check earlier and was told you can see my slides, so I will move on. So this is the steering committee number 3. So this is the third out of 3 meetings of this format. Again, you guys are regional leaders in the 5-county study area. If you missed both of the first meetings, we will do a quick recap on exactly what we're up to with this plan and where we're at. But again, very appreciative of your time and kind of stealing your lunch hour here to spend it with us to talk about this important project. So what we're going to talk about today is just quick, again, welcome and introductions, refamiliarize yourself with the plan. The last time we did one of these meetings with the full steering committee was in October. So it's definitely been a while. So we'll give you an update on where we're at with the project and some of the key points that you need to help make some decisions that we want your input on, are going back and reviewing the vision and goals and talking about how we did the call for projects. And then the financial analysis is kind of one of the key things that we have completed and that we want to share with you and get your input on. And that's where the prioritization comes from. So some of you may be familiar that Joe Z has retired or moved on to a new position on his way to retirement. So he has been replaced fairly recently with a wonderful gentleman named Mike Z. So Mike, if you want to unmute yourself and just give a quick introduction, I know you'll be working with a lot of the people on this call.
Dustin, thank you. I am Mike Z. Please feel free to call me Z or Mike Z. I'm not offended at all. I've heard every iteration of my last name. I have a civil engineering degree from University of Colorado, Denver. I worked as a traffic engineer for the Denver MPO, known as Dr. Cog. I also worked as an engineering specialist, bicycle pedestrian coordinator for Central Florida, 9 counties there with Florida Department of Transportation. And then I also worked at the city of Pensacola as a transportation planner with a focus on vulnerable roadway users, complete streets. So I approach this from a varied background. I'm very honored to be with the Southern Illinois Metropolitan Planning Organization and Greater Egypt. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them or approach me after the meeting via email. And I look forward to learning more. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you very much. I've had quite a few good interactions with Mike as we've gotten him up to speed on this project and just talked about kind of the goals for the transportation side of Greater Egypt moving forward, and you feel confident your region's in great hands. So Kerry Mendes, I'm not sure if he's hopped on or if he will join us today, but you all, I'm sure, know Kerry very well. So on our team, on the consultant team here, I'm Dustin Riekman. You probably have previously heard a much more pleasant voice of Katie Shackelford. She actually left this position and is now full-time doing basically grant writing and financial analysis. Fortunately, she was able to wrap up that part of this plan before she departed. So we feel very good about the work that was done there because that's really her specialty and her bread and butter. But I was the deputy project manager previously, so I'll be stepping in as the project manager until we complete the project, which is not very far off, as we'll talk about here with our schedule. Joining us also from Lockmuir, from my side, is Peter Williams. Peter's a planner. Stephen, I saw, is on as well. Stephen is with I-5 Group, and he's primarily helping us with public engagement. And Brian Ziegler is not on the call, I don't believe, but he is helping us with things like cost estimating and coordinating with some of the local agencies. And I know many of you know Brian very well as well. So that's the team. I won't belabor any of these points because you've heard it before if you've been in either of the 2 previous steering committee meetings. This is you guys. So I know that not everyone can, of course, make the meeting live, but we do solicit feedback, through the recording and through email correspondence and through personal phone calls in many cases. So appreciate everyone who is here live. We've got it looks like at least half of these folks represented. Again, I won't go through the exercise of having you all unmute and introduce yourselves because you've done that previously, and I want to respect your time today as we get through the material of the meeting. So just a reminder why what the steering committee does, kind of what's your role in this whole project. The focus here is looking out in the future, and you guys are in various ways local experts, in many cases technical experts, or you have a local leadership position. And so you have a very special voice and a very important voice in this process. As you are likely aware from previous updates, you all are really our core team. There's also public interaction with the general public. And then we also have a separate interaction with what we call the local leaders roundtable. Some of you wear both those hats, right? If you're a county engineer, for example, you're in both the local leadership roundtable and in the steering committee. The steering committee tends to be more technical folks, whereas the local leadership would also include things like county executives, mayors, things like that on the political side. So where are we with the project? So again, just a quick reminder, we're looking at Greater Egypt, which consists of 5 counties, and we're looking at all modes of transportation. And really the whole key with this thing is to use a lot of data, a lot of input, a lot of critical thinking about the future to come up with a prioritized project list that you guys can then use to leverage for funding. That's kind of where the bottom line of this is. And we're near that last point at this point in the process. So this may look familiar. Again, last time we met was in October 2021 as the steering committee. And so at that point, we were kind of in the beginning, or we had the draft of the goals, performance measures, things like that. We were kind of moving into looking at future transportation needs. We're now significantly progressed through the green part of the plan, you know, the money, the financial plan, the implementation plan, and kind of our last steps will be, you know, obviously doing a report. So today is an important meeting to help us kind of finalize the financial part of this and the project prioritization part of it. From here, we will have another public meeting in April, and I'll give you the date and time at the end of this presentation. And then we will have one more round in-person local leadership roundtable meetings in one day, likely in May. And the purpose of those 2 meetings will be to present the final report or draft of the final report, and then we'll wrap up the document and basically be done likely in May, at the very earliest, early June. So last time we met, we were again kind of in the red part of the plan. We had draft vision statement, draft goals. You all helped us come up with some objectives and some performance measures. We were also starting to look at scenario analysis for how different projects would influence different outcomes. So all that's done, so that those kind of middle tasks are complete. And we are nearly complete with the final task. I just kind of mentioned these on the schedule graphic, but looking at future trends and needs, again, the core being a financial plan, implementation plan. An implementation plan is basically saying we got a bunch of project needs, we've got some identified monies. How do they match up, and how do we prioritize what we can with the resources we're likely to have? And then obviously, like any good plan, this will culminate in a document. Our goal with the document, I think it'll be different than most plans you've seen in the past. It's going to have a big appendices. So we've got a bunch of separate kind of memos that we've already created as we're doing the project. So things like demographics or funding mechanisms, those are all in very detailed summaries that'll be at the back of the report. But the front of the report, the main report, is really an action report that gives very clear guidance on what Greater Egypt can do with the knowledge they now have coming out of this process. So it's really intended to be a very usable report, and either Mike or Kerry kind of at the end of this call will talk about next steps and how they're going to leverage this long-range transportation plan to hopefully get more money for the 5-county region. So goals and objectives, vision statement. This vision statement was very close to what you see on your screen when we met last time. The goals have changed quite a bit from your input specifically, as well as the public meetings. They were consolidated and the wording was changed a little bit. This vision statement and these goals are really important to keep in mind as we're prioritizing projects. So I'm going to review those. I'm not going to go through a lot of detail, but just say out loud each of the 6 goals so you guys can kind of remember what those are and some of the objectives that were tied to each of them. So the vision statement: the Greater Egypt region will be known as a land of opportunity, a strong region with a vibrant economy and pristine natural environment that make it a choice destination to live, grow, and prosper. And these were the 6 goals that were identified and that we are using to measure moving forward. So the first one is kind of the most obvious: increase transportation safety. And again, the 3 things that you see under that are the objectives. So it's basically breaking that goal down, like what does it mean to increase transportation safety? Beyond this, in the actual final report, you'll see for each of those objectives, performance measures. So this is a performance-driven plan. So how do you measure each of those objectives to see how they are changing over time? So that's definitely part of the plan as well. Number 2 goal was increase access to opportunities. And in some cases, these goals can sound a little generic. So that's why the objectives are helpful to have on the screen. So I'm kind of taking my time going through these. If you need to remind yourself, what did we mean when we said access to opportunities? So things like easy access to healthcare as an example, or multimodal access to our educational resources. Number 3 was increase our financial sustainability. There's 5 objectives. This is obviously a very important goal that had multifacets involved, everything from respecting taxpayer funds to being fiscally responsible in how we expand any transportation systems, all the way through how we operate our systems. And again, we have things in place to measure these moving forward. Support active and healthy living. So a lot of focus here on bicycle and pedestrian facilities, as well as access to healthcare. Number 5 was preserve natural resources. This is one of the keys. It was in the vision statement, I think twice, that this pristine environment, these natural resources, these recreational opportunities are super important, and we want to protect them both directly and then sort of indirectly from things like climate change and emissions. Goal 6, increase economic resilience. So it's kind of my favorite one as far as a unique wording, but it's really here about being smart about how we protect our resources from things like natural disasters, man-made disasters, having some redundancy in our systems, things like that. So the other thing that we were just starting to touch on in October when we last met was what we called a call for projects. So it's now complete, obviously, but what it was and what it was intended to do, it was as if we had money and we said, hey, every city, every county, every village, you have an opportunity here to tell us what projects you would like to see. And we also had public input. And if you remember, we had a map that people could draw in concerns or projects they would like to see. So kind of a massive outreach to say, hey, if you could do anything in your community, what would you want to do? And what are you already planning to do, but you don't have money for, et cetera. So we don't have money, but it was an exercise to say, if we did, what would we spend it on effectively? So that's what the call for projects was. I feel like it was very successful. As people submitted projects, we had them categorize them, as you can see on the screen here, and we're going to see the results of what came in. But new and improved roads, bicycle trails, multimodal, sidewalks, pedestrian, and then streetscape and public transit. And we also had them tie each of their submitted projects to one or more of the 6 goals that we just discussed. So these are the same 6 goals, just in a really short abbreviated version. So again, safety, access to opportunities, financial sustainability, active and healthy living, natural resources, and economic resilience. So we had 147 projects submitted. Now, about half of these were IDOT projects that were already planned. Basically, mostly we're going to talk about the capital bill and Rebuild Illinois, but there's a lot of activity already planned. So it's not as if we got 147 new projects that we'd never heard of, right? And then again, some of the county engineers had projects already in the pipeline or on the roadmap, at least in the future. Those were submitted. But I think pretty impressive, 147 projects identified. And we asked people to identify if they thought these were 1 to 10 year priorities or 11 to 25 year priorities. Again, our project goes out 25 years, our plan, I should say. So almost all, 129 were near term. If you know a need, of course, you wanted to address as soon as possible. So that's not really surprising. The total price tag, if we were able to do all those projects, was $865 million. Now, an important asterisk here, I'm sure you're all familiar with a corridor, a kind of a rough plan for something called the Southwest Illinois Connector. It's a massive project that kind of falls outside the scope of anything that we'd be able to manage with existing funding sources. It alone is around $800 or $880 million in conceptual cost. So it is not included in these dollar figures. It would skew everything greatly. It is included as an illustrative project, and you'll see it as we go through that later. So it's not like we excluded it, but we just excluded it from the financial analysis basically right here. So what's interesting, if you look at the projects as they were submitted based on dollar values, and it's if you do by number of projects, it's pretty similar. But by dollar values, 80% of the requests were for improving existing roads. And that to me is not surprising, because if you look at your goals, there's not really any goals about like building new roads, right? The goals are about really taking care of what you have, making it safer, making it more resilient. So that makes a lot of sense that the projects match the goals. The tie for second was bicycle and pedestrian facilities. You have a goal directly related to that and active and healthy living, and bridges. And, of course, bridges are safety, and there's a lot of bridge needs out there. So those two come in, basically tied for second. And then there was, some new roadway connections, but only 3% of the overall projects were directly related to new roadways, with the important exception of the Southwest Illinois connector, which would completely change the pie graph to just dominate the whole thing. So that's how we got the projects. Again, a lot of those were on IDOT's plan. Some were already on other plans, and then some were brand new submissions as part of the call for projects. So the next few slides here are kind of transportation funding 101 for those of you who don't deal with this stuff day to day. In full transparency, I don't deal with it day to day. I have a good understanding of it. Katie had a very thorough understanding of it, but so I'm kind of educating you and understanding it as I'm explaining it as well. So as you might be well aware, there was a new federal transportation bill passed last year. So there's a lot of money, a lot of regulation around that, to use a good word. But kind of like in a snapshot, we have all this federal money available for the state of Illinois to spend in different ways. What does that look like? And that's what this is. This is just saying, hey, as in Illinois, the breakdown of how federal funds are apportioned go through these programs, right? So the majority of it's through the National Highway Performance Program. And then the second biggest, 26%, is the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. And that one's really important to your region because what we call STR, or, surface transportation rural funding, comes out of that bullet point, out of that piece of the pie. And that's a lot of this federal funding that ends up being spent in your region on non-state routes, especially. There may be some programs on here you've never heard of. There may be some that you are familiar with. As an example, the third bullet there, Highway Safety Improvement Program, we often throw around HSIP for that. That's a significant source of funds. That's something that SIMPO has used their planning dollars to leverage and get SHIP funds to fix safety problems very effectively. So in my mind, it sounds like a big program, but in the scope of what Illinois gets, it's 3%, right? So it's not a big number in the big scheme of things, but still a big number in raw numbers. And those are the types of opportunities your planning efforts will set you up to get more of, because some of these are competitive. Some of these are based on allocations on things like population. And that's what this formula funding is. So as I mentioned, the Surface Transportation Block Grant is a portion to Illinois, and then Illinois makes these funds available through the STP program. So there's rural money, there's urban money, and there's bridge money. The majority of what you guys outside of SIMPO, outside of the urbanized area, which is by definition the urban money, everything else in the 5-county region is largely rural. There are some exceptions. There are some of the towns and cities that are big enough they get some money, but it's not a lot. It's maybe $50,000 to $100,000, a year or so. But there's a little bit of STU money, but it's largely STR money, which is that top bullet, and then there's local bridge money as well. And then for some of the counties, 2 of the 5 counties, Illinois has a state matching assistance program. Again, I'm not going into all these details, just so you know, it's complicated. There's a lot of funding sources. There's levers that when you pull one, it moves something else, but there is some help there for counties who maybe can't generate enough local funds to take advantage of federal funds and match as they're required to do. So now we've kind of talked about federal, getting down to state, and then how the state allocates that money in a formula fashion to the different entities, like the counties, for example. Then there's a subset here of what I would kind of coin these as the competitive monies, right? Like the formula funding is formula funding. These things on the screen are things in large part you can apply for and get competitively. So HSIP, as I mentioned, there's the Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program, there's Safe Routes to School. So these types of programs are really where having a really solid plan and having a collaborative effort, like we're setting up here with this first Greater Egypt plan, this is where you make your money, right? Like these are the things that set you up for success in obtaining more funds. And so if you look at what SIMPO's done in the urbanized area, they've tapped into these heavily. And that's very, very good for the region. Those are monies that someone was going to get in the state of Illinois. It's great that it goes to your region because you've got a united voice and a plan that sets you up to be competitive for these types of funds. So I'm sure you all have heard of the quote unquote capital bill. It is a behemoth. It was, I'm an Illinois resident, so I'm well aware it doubled our, our gas tax, and had a lot of fees. So it's very expensive. But on the good side of that, it generates a lot of revenue to do transportation projects. So you can just see a snapshot here from IDOT's website. It's $20 billion over 6 years. 4.8 billion. Again, this is statewide, but that's going to the local system. So it's great. I mean, as from an investment standpoint, and from the hats we're wearing today is caring about our transportation future. And then on the right here, you can see in IDOT District 9, which includes your 5 counties as well as several other counties. There's some major projects, not the least of which is I-57, and there's some major projects in several of the counties, including Perry County. Then there's a lot more projects that aren't on this big list, right? And that feeds into those 100+ projects that we talked about earlier in our call for projects. IDOT again had a lot identified. Pardon me, take a drink break there. So we talked about federal funds, state funds, and then there's these local funds, right? So, and again, I don't want you to, there's not gonna be a test over how this flow chart works on the left, but a major source of local funding is motor fuel tax. So it's taxes collected at the pump that get redistributed back to various programs. And you can kind of see the gas taxes, the 19 cents and 19 cents, for the gasoline tax, and how that splits. Some of it goes to a motor tax fund, some of it goes to a renewal fund, and then it gets split between roads and bridges and transit. And it's fairly complicated. But at the very bottom, you can see local governments get some of this money, right? So like Cook County gets 16%, and then other counties get 18%. So it's not a very big percentage of what's collected, but it's a significant amount of local funding. It's for our county engineers and other leaders and municipalities to use for transportation projects. So the good news is, that is set, and we know it's kind of a known. The bad news is the right side of the screen, and that is that it's on a downward trend. And this is pretty much true in any county. We just picked Jackson County as an example from 2015 to 2020, a 5-year trend. And the stark reality is that less motor fuel taxes are being collected. And so why is that? Well, cars are more fuel efficient. People are driving less. They're working from home. There's an emergence of electric vehicles, et cetera. So that's a trend. We don't know exactly where it's going. We know that it will create a significant problem, right? So, and we don't have the answers for those types of problems. Those are obviously large policy questions. How do you replace motor fuel tax monies in the future if they decline so much that you can't, meet your matches and things like that to leverage federal funding? So that is one of the findings, if you will, that there's a downward trend, and we're going to have to address it in other ways, likely through legislation. So that's kind of transportation funding 101. Hopefully that was helpful, and that kind of paints the picture for not only the realities that we face with transportation funding, but the opportunities, right? It's complex, but there's also a lot of things you can leverage if you do it the right way. And we have this very special moment in time with the capital bill with Rebuild Illinois, that there's a lot more transportation money available in the next several years. And we just had the new federal transportation bill last year, which, if you've been in this industry for any time, that those things often just get dragged out and extended. And the funds are not, you have no confidence in what the funding is going to be. So since we have a fresh federal bill, we have a much better idea what the funds are going to look like from those allocations. So we've got a bunch of projects, and we've got identified funding streams. And in the report, in that memo, it is table upon table upon table of dollars and data and allocations. I'm not going to go through all that. I don't think you care that much about those details. And if you do, obviously you can dig through the draft report here shortly. But the big picture here is, as part of a long range plan, we want to be financially constrained, which basically means we need to reasonably estimate how much money is going to come in. And then we need to allocate that money out to projects in a way that, they zero out. And then, of course, it never zeroes out, because there's always more need than there is supply. There's always more projects than there is money. And that's just it's always the reality, right? In our case, though, it's a pretty good split. We have 106 projects from our list that have identified sources of funds. Again, that's over 25 years. A lot of those do fall in the 1 to 10 year range. A lot of those are funded from IDOT already or through the capital bill, Rebuild Illinois. But we do have funding streams. You're able to do reasonable math, make reasonable assumptions to think, those 106 are in good shape. Those 106 are detailed by county in our report, and you'll see those, and they're on a map, they're on an interactive map. So very public, and everyone can see what those are. Again, I'm not going to go through all those here because I don't think you want to listen to me talk about 106 different projects, but they're great projects, and we think we have high confidence they can be funded. The caveat with these things is always we can't clearly predict the future, right? We don't know how inflation is going to treat us, what construction costs are really going to be. If funding streams change, politics change, things happen. But based on history and the federal bill and the Rebuild Illinois monies that are committed, we do think those 106 are in good shape. So that leaves us with 33 additional projects, unfunded projects. And in the parlance of planning and these long-range plans, we call those illustrative projects, right? It's a fancy word for saying we want to do these things, but we don't have any money for them. But these are always in every plan. You'll see them in Simcoe's plan. You'll see them in St. Louis, MPO's large plan for how they want to spend money. There's always unfunded need. So the key question becomes, how do you prioritize which of those get funded first when you do get more money? And in other words, when opportunities come up to get more money, which projects are going to be best qualified to go after that? Because often this money is not coming out of the streams that we've already talked about. It comes out of special allocations, things like large grants, right? They change the name through every bill, but I think many of you locally are familiar with like Tiger grants. Then they were called build grants. But I believe like the Carbondale Transit Station might have been funded that way. But these are like large one-time grants. They're very competitive. Our firm writes a lot of grant applications, and we've had a lot of success with those, but it takes a lot of data. And you need, basically as a prerequisite, that it has been already identified in a long-range plan as a need, right? And so again, that's where this coming up with this list is going to be really important. And that's kind of my assignment for you guys, is to help with this. So what we've got right now is these 33 projects that are illustrative or unfunded, and we need to prioritize them. And we also need to acknowledge that each of you in the roles that you're in, you probably have pretty good knowledge of some of them, and you may have no knowledge of some of them, right? And there's some that you just know as someone who drives in the region or rides a bike in the region, that you'll know it when you see it, sort of thing, right? So we're not going to have you try to literally rank 33 projects. That would be very hard to do and kind of unfair to ask of you. But what we do feel is fair to ask of you, and what we are going to ask of you, is to basically take a low, medium, and high approach here, right? And when you think about that, if you get a given project and you want to give it low, medium, and high, part of that consideration is it an important project, right? Is it a priority for the 5-county region? And kind of part and parcel with that thought is, does it line up with our goals? So we've talked about these 6 goals. I repeated them on purpose because they're important. And you want to be thinking about a given project in the context of those 6 goals. So does this improve safety? Does this improve, health and well-being? Does this improve economic resiliency? Those sort of questions. Again, I'm thinking you can spend 1 minute on each project and really do a pretty thorough job with these projects. And we have a tool to help you with that. And so what we're not going to do, I'm not going to sit here and hold you on a Zoom call and say, spend the next 30 minutes doing this. What I am going to do is, in this meeting much earlier than the hour and a half that we had allotted, purposely kind of went through things at a higher level here to give you time, if you're able to kind of, after we end the meeting today, and we still have some more stuff to talk about, but after we end the meeting, it'd be really great if you want to sit at your computer while you already have this time blocked off and just go access this link and go through this list and give us your feedback. That would be great. Otherwise, if we get it within a week to 10 days, perfect. If you can't do it today, we understand. But when you access this survey, what you're going to find is it's broken down by county to try to make it a little more manageable. We didn't want to just throw 33 random projects at you. And then there's also a map. So when you open up this link, and Peter, if you're available, can throw that. Kerry's joining us right now. If Peter can throw that link in our chat, then you guys can just copy and paste it into your browser when we finish up. Otherwise, if you go to SurveyMonkey, you can search for Greater Egypt projects and it'll come up as well. But that's the URL, surveymonkey.com/r/Greater Egypt projects. And then you're just going to see a list of projects by county, and they have the name of the project. They have a brief description of what category it falls in, a rough cost estimate for it, and then a brief description of what the project consists of. So these three examples on your screen, we have the I-57-149 interchange modification, obviously a large project. It is 21.5 million. It's improving the existing roadway. Very different is number 2 on the list, Franklin Street sidewalk. It's a sidewalk, a new ADA compliant sidewalk on Franklin Street in Franklin County here. So that's only 235,000. So which of these do you think is low, medium, or high priority? And that's really your judgment call. The other thing I want to point out here is if you have no knowledge of a project and you're like, I am not going to spend any time thinking, like going to figure out what this is really about, I don't really get it on the surface, you can skip projects. So just rank the ones that you feel comfortable ranking. And again, you're thinking like, this does not really meet our goals. This really shouldn't be our priority if we were able to get funding, all the way up to this is like very critical to our needs. This meets all of our goals. It really matches with our vision statement. Those are the high priorities. And then some things will fall in between. So 1, 2, or 3, low, medium, high. And again, when you go to the actual survey page, you'll find a link, and that link will open in a new window, a interactive map. So if you're in a certain county, you can just zoom in and you'll be able to see each of these projects. They are not sequentially ordered. They came from the master list, and then these are the 33 that got kicked out as illustrative. So you'll see like 1, 2, 4, and 20 or whatever, right? So in this example, I went over to the map. I clicked on project number 1, which is that interchange modification. So you can see visually where it's at. In this case, it's 1 dot because it's an interchange, but you can see, project 51, project 48, just to the left there. Also in Franklin County, those you can kind of see the limits of what the project is about. So hopefully that's helpful as well. So again, I know Kerry just joined us, but Kerry, what we're asking folks to do is when we're done with the meeting, which we're not quite done yet, if they can spend this time to go ahead and go to that link, which is in the chat, and fill out the survey for us and help us rank these 33 projects on the illustrative list. And Kerry tuned in just in time because I was going to cue him up at this point to kind of say, okay, we're not done with the plan. We're getting close. We need to prioritize these illustrative projects, and we need feedback on the 106 funded projects that you'll see in a report format, pretty shortly here in the next several weeks. Then there's the question of what's next. We had this idea to do a plan. We spent a year and a half together in various meetings. We came up with a plan that hopefully everyone thinks is really good and agrees with the content. What are we going to do with it? And so that's why I wanted to queue up Kerry to kind of give an update from Greater Egypt's perspective on what they want to do with this plan and with this group moving forward.
Well, first and foremost, we want to have this plan to really highlight the projects that we have and to help prioritize those projects. So if any of the communities need to apply for funding or provide additional justification for their project, that it could easily be pointed to that it's part of a regional plan. The other part that we're looking at is a long-range transportation plan as a requirement for establishing a rural transportation planning organization. And some of you I know are familiar with the Southern Illinois Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is required in federal law. A rural transportation planning organization is not required, but they're encouraged. In Illinois, we currently don't have any official rural transportation planning organizations, and I'm trying to recommend those to the state and going through the process of establishing one and showing the benefit, whether we get officially designated by IDOT as a rural transportation planning organization or not. I would like to try to function similar to one, and having a rural transportation or a long-range transportation plan is kind of the foundation of that. So what we have been doing and what I would like to continue doing is applying for planning dollars, similar to how we funded this plan, to assess the needs of the region and to try to identify projects or solutions to problems in the area. Some of you in the county know we have done some studies for rural safety on roadways, and those studies had led to millions of dollars in highway safety improvement program projects. And we are getting ready to kick off another safety study for the 5-county region, which would focus more on the municipal areas. So the Mount Vernon, DuQuoin, Pinckneyville, Benton, West Frankfort type areas, which weren't part of that prior study. And then I'm working on a new application that would be more related to bike planning in the region. And those are the types of studies that can be funded and that we have been funding in the urban area. And a rural transportation planning organization could help us to substantiate continued funding for those types of studies. Plus, I'd like to have a committee that I could get ideas for what the needs of the region are, so we know what to apply for additional study dollars. And again, at the end of all that, the goal is not having a bunch of plans and studies that we can put in our bookshelf or just post on the website. Is that we really focus them towards funding streams so we can implement the plan. So our studies recently have had more of a focus on known funding streams to implement these projects, which is why we've had a pretty high success rate of turning plans into actual, concrete projects, whether it's, new bike lanes or changing intersections over to roundabouts, or adding, miles of shoulders and rumble stripes. Those kinds of things have all been funded here recently, and pretty big dollars. So we want to continue to do that. These plans are leading to actual construction dollars. And that's really the goal at the end of all this.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Kerry. That's I think it's important. We talked about that at the very beginning of this process, like why are we doing this and what's the ultimate goal? And now we've been through kind of the technical muck and going through all the process that it takes. It's been a great process, but ultimately, like Kerry said, I think all of our collective goals are to leverage this type of effort to actually get more investment, in the 5-county region. So where do we go from here on our end? This is our last steering committee meeting. I would again ask kindly that you participate in that survey to help us rank or grade each of those illustrative projects as a low, medium, or high priority, and we'll see what that looks like collectively. And obviously, we'll also have some more input from others in that process. But you're really the core group. It's really you guys giving us that feedback that's going to really help prioritize those. So that's really important, and that's my only ask coming out of the meeting. Other than that, we'll have a draft report in the next several weeks. A lot of that's already constructed. As I mentioned at the top of the call, it's going to be in a format that's very usable and actionable, with then a big old appendices with a lot of data and things for people that want to comb through details. So yeah, we'll be finalizing that basically once we get this project list prioritized and we get our ducks in a row for our final public engagement, which the final public meeting has been set. This will be a virtual meeting, so it'll be again hosted via Zoom. And in this meeting, it'll basically be a recap of the plan, sharing our findings, soliciting feedback from the public, anything in there that they want to challenge or they want to add or they have questions about. That's really the purpose of that final public meeting, is the final opportunity for review and comment before we call the plan final. So that will be April 27th at noon. We're going to do it virtually, and then we'll immediately release the recording. In our last public meeting, many more people watched the recording than the live. So we're not going to try to have 2 different live times. It seemed kind of redundant. So we're going to just do the noon time, April 27th. And then our final meetings, our final public engagement will be the last round of those regional leaders roundtable meetings. Again, I mentioned this earlier in the call, but many of you are invited to those. And then also the non-technical people, the leaders, as in like mayors and, chamber of commerce presidents, people like that who aren't necessarily technical, but they definitely have, we really need their input, and we really need their goodwill and support of the plan and of this whole idea moving forward. So those are not scheduled yet. They'll likely be in May, probably early May. And so what we're going to try to do there is get one day and have 2 different identical meetings. likely one, this is what we did last time, but likely one in at Greater Egypt's office in Marion, and then likely one in Benton, just to try to spread them out, let people not have to drive as far, because these are in-person meetings. So you'll start seeing invitations for this soon, as soon as we get the date lined up and the times, but there'll likely be one at 10 a.m. and one at 2 p.m. And then you can choose either based on time or proximity, which one you'd prefer to attend. This will be similar to the public meeting. It will basically be presenting to you all the final report and hopefully having a robust discussion, Q&A, talking about next steps, talking about what we want to do with the report, those sort of things, just kind of the capstone on this whole process. And of course, we'll have a final report that will be available on the website. So those are the next steps. We're kind of at the tail end of the project, and we feel really like it's really solid. We've had internal meetings with Greater Egypt staff and some of the county engineers. I think everyone's pretty happy with where we've gotten at this point, but we always want more input if we can get it. So with that, I'm going to turn my attention back over to the attendees here. Let's see, Mike asked about slides being downloaded in the chat. Absolutely, yeah, I can provide a link to the slides as well as the full recording of the presentation. We'll get that up on the website through Stephen. So with that, any other comments, questions, anything, and you feel free to unmute yourself, and I'll try to keep an eye out for you over here. If we don't have much of a discussion here, then we only used half of our allotted time. So it gives you 45 minutes to run over and take that survey over at SurveyMonkey. Again, that link is in the chat if you missed it, or shoot me an email. Peter and I, our emails are on the screen. So if you have any issues getting to the survey or have questions about it, just hit one of us up and we will help you out. Okay, well, I don't see any questions, so that's all good. We will we'll be in touch about the local roundtable meetings coming up soon, and then we'll look for your feedback over at SurveyMonkey and really appreciate your input. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks a lot for your attention.